All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching video number 2, problems 11 through 20 for the fall Algebra 1 review. Before we go into it, I want to do a quick review of functions. Remember that we have an equation. We know it's an equation because it has an equal sign. But when I want to make it a function, then I'm going to change the notation. So it says f of x. When it's a function, we know that x values do not repeat. Y values can repeat. So if you take a look at these two tables right here, if you're looking at this one and this one, which one is not a function? This one. See how the x's repeat? So I know it is not a function. If I look here, this one is a function. My x values do not repeat. The y values can repeat all day long. It doesn't matter. Or the range. Now, if it were to say, tell me to find f of 3, that means everywhere that I have an x, I write a 3. So I would just say 2 times 3 plus 1, that's 6 plus 1, which is 7. So I know f of 3 equals 7. If I were to go to this table here and ask you what is f of 1, then I know that x equals 1, and you're telling me to find 7. If I were to say f of x equals 8, what does x equal? Then you would tell me that it equals -4 because this is the y value, and that would mean that x is with my y value. All right, now, I can do function notation like f of x, but sometimes you'll also see things like c of x or k of h. We can have different letters. It depends on the word problem. Now I want to start with number 11. I want you to create a table that does not represent a function. So if I'm creating a table that does not represent a function, I know functions that the x values cannot repeat. So if I want to make one that's not, then I just make my x values repeat. And I can make up any numbers I want. So you see here I put 2 x values in of 1. Now you can put whatever you want in. I'm just creating numbers and making them up. Now it says find the range. The range is my y values for f of x equals, I didn't highlight right. For f of x equals -3x squared plus 4. Now you can do this by hand or you can do it in your calculator. If I substitute in 1, then I know I'm going to have -3 times 1 squared plus 4. If I substitute in -2, then I would have -3 times -2 squared plus 4. And if I substitute in -3, then I would have -3 times -3 squared plus 4. And then you would do that math in your calculator to get the answers. I'll tell you that that is a lot more work, and it concerns me, especially here, that you'll type it in incorrectly. So what I recommend that you do is that you use your calculator, and in your y equals, in your y1, you type in -3x squared plus 4, and then you go look at your table, and then you'll know, and then you just go look on the table and you arrow up and down, and you'll find that 1 has 1, and -2 is -8, and -3 is -23. So when you're to look at your table, that's the way it would look like. And so my range is 1, -8, and -23. In other words, I put these numbers in, these x values in, and got these numbers out. Now, let's take a look at number 3. Now, I've already told you that I'm partial to using the calculator on these types of problems, so we're going to go ahead and plan for that. So here I have, they want to know what f is -3. And I know -3 is where the x is going to go. So if I were to do it by hand, then I would say f of negative 3 equals 2 minus 3 parentheses negative 3 minus 2 plus 5 times negative 3 minus 16. And you can do that all in your calculator. When you plug that in, you'll get negative 14. Now, that seems like a lot of work to me. Instead, I could say y1 equals 2 minus 3 parentheses x minus 2 plus 5x minus 16. Now, I know you're not used to putting something that complicated into y1, but you can. Then you're going to go look at the table and scroll up and down, and you'll scroll where x equals negative 3. And when you look on that table in the second column, it'll say y equals negative 14. So we know our answer is negative 14. Taking a look at problem number 14, before we go into this, I want to review. Remember, we said Dr. XY wears her ID in the office. Just a quick reminder of what those means. This is domain, is x values, it's independent, and it's the input. Whereas this is range, y values, it's dependent, and it's the output. So if I've been asked to identify the domain on this problem, then I know I'm looking at the x-axis. So I'm looking at this x-axis to decide what the domain is. I notice I have an endpoint here, and so I go ahead and draw my line or put my post-it note down to the x-axis, and I see that's at negative 3. I'm going to write it up here differently. I don't like the way that's going to crowd stuff up. So I know that's at negative 3. Now I look here and I have an arrow. That's not an endpoint, it's an arrow, which means I can't use this as a boundary. I actually have to ignore it, and it goes on forever. So what I can see is if I look here, this is 0 on the x-axis, and here is 10. What's happening between negative 3 and 10? Are the x's getting bigger or smaller? Yeah, they're getting bigger or greater than. So I know that x is greater than negative 3. Because this was a filled-in circle, I know that it's equal to. So that took care of my range. Now I need to look at my domain. In order to do my domain, I'm going to look at the y-axis. So I draw my y all the way to the y-axis here and to the y-axis here, or I put my post-it note down. Now the y-axis is right here. That's this line. So I'm looking here at this line. The first thing I notice is that has an arrow, so I can't draw anything to there. That's going to keep going on forever. I look at my y-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's at positive 5, right? So if you think about it, this point was at negative 3, 5, which is what helped me figure out my x value for the domain and my y value for the range. So I know y. Now I'm going to take a look at the y's. That's 5. This is 0. This is negative 10. So it's getting smaller. So I know y is less than or equal to 5. Looking at 15. Now this one has 2 endpoints. So I'm going to start by finding what those x values are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5. And then 1, 2, 3, that's 3. So I know that my x's are between, all my x values are between negative 5 and 3. So that means it's negative 5, I've got an x, and it's a 3. Whenever you're setting up these inequalities, you're going to want to put the lower number on the left and the higher number on the right. So I look here, this is a closed circle, so I'm going to underline it, and this is an open circle, so I just do like that. Just leave it without underlined, so it's less than. So when I read this, I read it as negative 5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 3. I'm taking a look at the range. The range deals with my y values. So that means I'm going to look at the graph as it relates to the y-axis right here. So I go back to the y-axis here and look, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that 6? It's hard for me to see on the computer. Nope, it's 7. So that's at 7. And then if I look back here, that's at -1. So let me do that better. I'm going to do it in blue. I don't like the way that looks. All right. So I put my Post-it note here, and that happens at 7 on the y-axis. I put my Post-it notes here, and that's -1, because this where it crosses is at 7, and right here where it crosses is at -1, if I had drawn that line prettier. I do the lowest number on the left, highest number on the right. We're dealing with y's, so I put y in the middle. Now I go look at the points. This is less than or equal to. This is open. Oh, I did that wrong. Did you see that? Look, the open circle is with -1. Ooh, that would have been bad. So less than, and then the closed circle is with 7, less than or equal to. All right, taking a look at number 16. I'm going to tell you right now that when people are looking at 16, in general, most students get the domain correctly because they can easily see the arrows and they can see that it's going to go on forever, which means you have to ignore these boundary lines. And so they know if it goes on forever that it's all real numbers. However, when it comes to range, kids often miss this one, okay? Range is the y values. So they look and they draw a line here and they draw a line here because that's the highest point and the lowest point. The problem is, if you notice, the graph keeps going. So there is no high point. There is no maximum here on this graph. However, there is a low. There is a minimum y value, which is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's at -7. And I can see that it uses all the y values above that. So I have y is greater than or equal to -7. So I would draw or put my Post-it note here. Taking a look at number 17. Now this is a table. So the first thing I'm going to do in my calculator is do stat edit L1, L2. And I'm going to put these numbers in L1 and L2. Now if you're watching this video, you need to make sure you're doing those steps and making it happen. Then I do stat calc 4, and what I get is I get in my calculator the equation 28x plus 525. The problem is when you read this, we've got h and t. Now this is my x values and these are my y values, so I know I'm going to write it t of h because we would have written it f of x, but instead of x we have an h. And so that means over here, instead of x, uh-oh, it's not going to let me erase for some reason. You'll just have to pretend I wrote it perfect the first time. It's h. So I would say t of h equals 28h plus 525. What is the rate of change for this function? So when they're asking for the rate of change, they're asking for it in words. Okay? Slope is the rate of change in a real-life context. So let's go back and read the problem to make sure we understand what we're being asked. So it says, the table below shows the relationship between the cost of tuition and the number of semester hours taken at Blinn. So I know that the rate of change is the slope. We know that the slope is 28, okay? So the slope is the change in y over the change in x. In this case, it's tuition over hours. And that's what I use to put it in words. So I know my slope is $28 per hour. What is the value of t to the 16? So you're going to take this and put it in your y1. So y1, you'll type in 28x plus 525. Look at your table. The x value is 16, and the y value is going to be 973. So we know that to take 16 hours is $973. Taking a look at number 18, let's read this question. It says, suppose the cost of renting a car is $25 per day. So we know that C is the cost, and we've got $25 per day lets me think that my slope is going to be 25. Plus an initial fee of 100. The word initial fee or beginning fee lets me know that that's my b value. It says write a function that best describes the relationship of d if d represents the number of days. So I know that that's going to be c of d equals 25 was our rate, so 25 times the number of days plus our initial fee of 100. And it says write the description of the rate of change. Well, again, I know that the rate of change is 25, and I know that it's $25 per day. Right there, it just lays it out. I just have to put it in words. So it'd say $25 per day. And you could have said $25 per day or $25 for each day. Now 19 is super easy. You put this in L1, L2. Do stat calc 4 and store your equation if you need it. In this case, you'll get y equals negative 1x plus 1, or you can write it y equals negative x plus 1. Taking a look at problem number 20, it says find the slope of the line. Well, if I want to find the slope of the line, I know the slope is the change in y over the change in x, which we remember as rise over run. So I can pick any 2 points I want. I'm going to pick this point and this point. And I just draw my triangle. It doesn't matter how I draw my triangle. I can draw it below or above. And when I look, I'm going to count the x's on each, or the boxes. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So if my slope is the rise over the run, or vertical over horizontal, I know I have 5 is my rise and 4 is my run. Is the slope of this line positive or negative? It's negative, so it would be negative 5/4. Another way to look at it would be, as I draw from this point to the next point, because you always read it left to right, I go down 5, right 4. Down has to be negative, so I know I've got negative 5/4. Now this is the end of the review for problems 11 through 21. However, the next video has 21 through, I said through 21. This is problems 11 through 20. The next video has 21 through 30.